Chapter 14, A Dollar's Worth. The next day was Thursday. Hetty had already done her work well. The school children crowded about Tom and Caddie and Warren asking questions. Was it true that they had a real Indian scalp belt? Did it have 100 scalps on it? Had John really given it to Caddie to keep? What did it look like? Were there any light-colored scalp locks on it? When could they see it? How much would they have to pay? During the first questions, the Woodlawn children maintained a mysterious silence. To the last two, they deigned a reply. You can see it on Saturday afternoon in our barn, and you can pay a marble or a stick of candy or a piece of flint or anything you've got that you can want to trade to see it. I've got a good slingshot crotch. Will you take that? Shouted someone. I've got a picture card that came from back east. Will you take that? It appeared that business would be very good. In the middle of the morning, through the sound of the droning voices chanting the reading lesson, a timid knock was heard on the schoolhouse door. Miss Parker, on her throne at the other end of the room, did not hear it. It came again, and the children began turning their heads around to look at the door. First the outer door opened and closed. There was a moment of silence. Then the cloakroom door opened ever so softly, and an Indian woman entered the schoolroom in her silent moccasins. She stood a moment, troubled and ill at ease, searching the schoolroom with her bright black eyes. A large bundle which she carried, she rested beside the door. Caddie knew who she was. She was Sam Hankinson's wife, the mother of the little half-breed boys who traded lunches with the Woodlawns. Her little boys turned now and saw her, and the youngest one held out his arm and gave out a stifled cry. With a swift movement, like a bird alighting from a low bough, the Indian woman ran to her children and knelt beside them, gathering first one and then another into her arms. She spoke to them in her own language, words guttural, broken, and soft as the chatter of mother partridge to her brood. The boys answered in the same language, clinging to her and crying. By this time half of the white children were on their feet, and Miss Parker had come down from her platform. The reading lesson was forgotten in a sudden sense of trouble and unrest. "Ma, ma!" cried the three little boys, clinging to the Indian woman and sobbing. Each of them in turn she pressed against her heart, then held each little brown head between her hands, pushing back the tangled hair and looking earnestly into the face, as if she would fix its image in her mind forever. When she had done this, she kissed each one upon the forehead and stood up. They still clung round her skirts, crying, "Ma, ma, don't go, don't!" The Indian woman put them away from her and stood straight and alone. The tears were running unheeded down her cheeks. To Miss Parker she said, "I go to my people." Then she turned and left the schoolroom. At the door she took up her bundle and swung it onto her shoulders. She did not look back. The cloakroom door closed, and then the outside door. They saw her pass by the window, going toward the woods. For a moment the only sound in the schoolroom was the sobbing of the three little boys. Then Miss Parker said sharply, "Go on with your reading, please." The drone of voices rose again, but it was as if a dark shadow or an icy wind had gone through the schoolhouse and changed everything. Caddie went on reading, but 3 bright tears fell on the page of her book and made odd little blisters over the type. That evening she spoke about it to Mother. "Why did she go away like that, Mother? She didn't want to go and leave her children, and they didn't want her to go either." "It is hard to explain to you, Caddie," said Mother. "You see, Mr. Hankinson married her when there were very few white people in this country. He was not ashamed of her then. But now that there are more and more of his own people coming to live here, he is ashamed that his wife should be an Indian. I dare say the massacre scare had something to do with it, too. Folks seem to hate the red men more than ever they did before. Though why they should, I can't say. Goodness knows the massacre was only in their own minds, but Sam Hankinson hasn't a very strong character. Now if your father had married an Indian—" "Father married an Indian?" cried Tom. "He never would." "Perhaps not," said Mrs. Woodlawn, smiling a little and tossing her head, remembering how pretty she had been as a girl in Boston. "But if he had, you may be sure that he would never have sent her off because he was ashamed of her. No, not a good man like your father." That night, after Caddie went to bed, she lay thinking for a long time. Hetty and Minnie were sound asleep. Presently she got up and lit the candle. On the chest of the drawers stood her little trinket box. She opened it and looked inside. There was the silver dollar, safe and round and shining. She took it out and held it to the candlelight. It was really beautiful, beautiful in itself, aside from what it could buy. Then she knotted it securely into her handkerchief, and put the handkerchief into the pocket of her school apron. After that she climbed into bed and went to sleep. At school the next morning, the little Hankinsons were late. Their hair was untidy and their round faces were stern and unsmiling. They were never good at lessons, and this morning they were worse than ever. Their eyes were swollen with crying, but Miss Parker was tactful and did not ask too much of them. Caddie's eyes kept wandering to them over her books. It was hard to keep her mind on spelling and sums when she knew that they were sitting nearby, so quiet and full of hurt bewilderment. Then she felt her dollar heavy in her pocket, and she was pleased that she had saved it for so long. After school, she laid her hand on Gussie's arm. He was not nearly so big as Warren, and she had a motherly desire to pat his head, but she didn't. "Gussie," she said, "you and Pete and Sammy come with me to Dunfield's store. I'm going to give you a surprise." The three little half-breeds looked at her in astonishment. For a moment they were surprised out of their sorrow. "What for?" asked Gussie suspiciously. "Just for fun," said Caddie with a smile. "I've got a whole silver dollar to spend." And she jingled it against a marble and a bit of slate pencil in her pocket. "Candy?" suggested little Sammy, with a sudden glitter in his eye. "Yes, sirree," said Caddie importantly. "Come along and see." Mr. Adams of Dunville store was accustomed to visitors after school. The children often came in with a penny or two, or sometimes only wishful looks, to examine the glass jars in which he kept brown horehound sticks, or strips of peppermint candy, or wintergreen lozenges. But today he was quite amazed when Caddie Woodlawn, with the air of a queen, ushered in the three little half-breeds and laid a silver dollar on the counter. "I want to spend it all, Mr. Adams," she said, "so you'll have to tell me when I've used it up. I want some horehound and peppermint and some pink wintergreens, and then I want 3 tops in different colors with good strong strings. And will you please tell me how much that is, because if there's anything left, I want to get some more things." "Well, upon my word!" exclaimed Mr. Adams, "and bless my soul, too! But does your mother know you're spending a silver dollar, Caddie?" "Not yet, but it's all right. It's my own dollar, and Father said I could spend it as I liked, and I'll tell Mother as soon as I get home." The little Hankinsons looked on in amazement. The black mood of despair which had enveloped them all day had turned into wonder, and now wonder was rapidly giving way to incredulous delight. Candy? Tops? No one had ever bought such things for them before. "Well, Miss Caddie, that comes to 30 cents," said Mr. Adams, when the bewildered boys, with the help of Caddie, had selected the candy and tops. They were grinning now from ear to ear, and Caddie thought that, with so much money left to spend, she had better be a little wise. "I'd like to see some combs now, if you please. I'd like 3 small ones if they aren't too dear." "Here you are, my girl," said the storekeeper, bringing down a dusty box from a shelf. He was smiling, too, by now, and almost as eager as the little Hankinsons to see what Caddie would buy next. "I think," said Caddie, presenting the 3 combs, "that your mamma would like you to keep your hair combed nice and tidy, and it'll be more fun if you've got combs of your own." Unused to gifts of any sort, the small brown boys beamed as delightedly over combs as over tops and candy. Caddie looked inquiringly at Mr. Adams. "It's not gone yet," he said encouragingly. "You still have got 30 cents." Caddie examined her protégés with maternal eyes. Certainly their noses needed attention as well as their hair. "I guess handkerchiefs had better come next," she said thoughtfully. 30 cents worth of nice, cheerful red handkerchiefs, if you please. Mr. Adams had the very thing, large enough to meet any emergency, and of a fine turkey red. Caddie was satisfied, and the little Hankinsons were speechless with delight. The red was like music to their half-savage eyes. They waved the handkerchiefs in the air, they capered about and jostled each other, and laughed aloud as Caddie had never heard them do before. "Now you can go home," said Caddie, giving each of them a friendly pat, "and have a good time, and mind you remember to have clean noses and tidy hair on Monday when you come to school." Dazed with their good fortune, they tumbled out of the store, whooping with joy and entirely forgetting, if they ever knew, that thanks were in order. Caddie and the storekeeper watched them race away, the red handkerchiefs flapping joyously in the breeze. "Well, young lady," said Mr. Adams, with an amused twinkle in his eye, "now your dollar's gone, and you didn't get a thing out of it for yourself." "Oh, yes, I did, Mr. Adams," she cried, and then she stopped. It was no use trying to tell a grown-up. It was hard even to explain to herself, and yet she'd had her dollar's worth. She found more words for it later when Tom, feeling himself for once the thrifty one, protested. "But, Caddie, you needn't have spent your whole dollar. You could have got them each a top or horehound stick and kept the rest for yourself." "No, Tom, it had to be all of it. I wanted to drive the awful lonesome look out of their eyes, and it did, Tom. It did.